Imagine this. You are a 12-year-old boy named Alexios, standing exposed on a marble platform in the Athenian Agora in the year 420 BCE, awaiting a future shaped by the customs of your time. Your hands tremble as potential buyers circle you like vultures, examining your teeth, your muscle tone, the unblemished smoothness of your skin. The morning sun casts long shadows across the marketplace, but all you can feel is the cold stone beneath your bare feet and the weight of dozens of eyes appraising your young body like livestock. The auctioneer's voice echoes off the marble columns as he lists your qualities in clinical detail. Born free in Thessaly, captured during a recent raid, educated in basic letters and music, virgin condition verified by examination. You tried to make yourself small, to disappear, but there's nowhere to hide on this platform of shame. The men bidding on you aren't looking at your face. They're evaluating assets they plan to use for their most intimate pleasures. What you don't know yet is that you're about to become part of an institution so normalized in Greek society that philosophers will write about the proper treatment of boy lovers. Poets will compose verses about the beauty of male youth, and the most powerful men in Greece will compete to own children like you. This isn't a story about love or mentorship. This is the brutal reality of legalized child exploitation in the cradle of democracy. Before we dive deeper into these forgotten testimonies of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that subscribe button. These buried voices deserve to be heard, and there are so many more stories waiting to be told. You're helping preserve these testimonies by staying connected to this journey through history's darkest corners. Ancient Greece, celebrated as the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, and civilization itself, built its cultural achievements on the systematic exploitation of children. While historians celebrate Athenian democracy and Spartan military prowess, they often gloss over the institution that provided intimate companionship to the men who created Western thought. The eromenos system wasn't an aberration or a secret shame. It was the foundation upon which Greek male society operated. The word eromenos literally means beloved one, but the reality was far from loving. These were boys, typically between the ages of 12 and 18, who entered, whether by purchase, gift, or designation, the households of adult men known as erastes, where they were expected to offer personal companionship and fulfill culturally assigned roles. The system was so embedded in Greek culture that refusing to participate could mark a man as antisocial. Philosophers like Plato wrote elaborate justifications for these relationships. Military leaders relied on boy companions for emotional support. Politicians flaunted their beautiful eromenos as symbols of their refinement and power. The procurement networks that supplied Greek men with boy companions operated with the efficiency of any other commercial enterprise. Wars provided the most reliable source of new victims. When Greek city-states conquered foreign territories, the selection of attractive boys was as systematic as the collection of gold and silver. Military commanders had first choice of captives followed by wealthy citizens who could afford premium prices for exotic boys from distant lands. But warfare wasn't the only source. Debt slavery created a steady stream of Greek children whose families couldn't meet their obligations. Fathers would sell sons to creditors, convincing themselves that servitude in a wealthy household was better than starvation in poverty. Some families even bred children specifically for sale, raising boys with an eye toward the preferences of potential buyers. The slave markets of Athens, Corinth, and Sparta featured specialized sections for boy companions. These weren't hidden back-alley transactions, but public markets where potential Erastes could examine merchandise in broad daylight. Boys were displayed nude, allowing buyers to assess their physical development, skin condition, and potential for intimate service. Sellers provided detailed histories, including education level, musical training, and previous intimate experience. The pricing structure reflected the brutal economics of human trafficking. A virgin boy from a good family could cost 50 times more than an agricultural slave. Boys with fair skin and Greek features commanded premium prices, while foreign captives were valued for their exotic appearance. The youngest boys, those just entering puberty, were the most expensive of all. Your daily existence as an Eromenos in a wealthy Athenian household was carefully regulated to maximize your availability and appeal to your Erastes. You woke before dawn to begin elaborate grooming rituals that consumed hours of each day. Your body hair was meticulously removed using painful processes involving hot wax and bronze tweezers. Your skin was rubbed with olive oil and perfumed with expensive aromatics imported from across the Mediterranean. The clothing selected for you was designed to display your youth and beauty while marking your status as property. Delicate chitons in expensive fabrics, jewelry that emphasized your slender neck and wrists, sandals that showed off well-maintained feet. Everything about your appearance was calculated to remind observers that your Erastes possessed something precious and enviable. Your Erastes controlled every aspect of your existence. When you ate, what you wore, who you spoke to, how you spent your time. Most importantly, he controlled when and how he accessed your body for his pleasure. These encounters weren't limited to nighttime privacy. Greek men saw intimate access to their Eromenos as a right to be exercised whenever desire struck them. The philosophical justifications created by Greek thinkers to excuse these relationships reveal the sophisticated mental gymnastics required to normalize child exploitation. Plato argued that love between an older man and a beautiful boy was the highest form of affection, superior to relationships with women because it was based on intellectual and spiritual connection rather than mere physical desire. This conveniently ignored the fact that these relationships began with the purchase of children who had no choice in the matter. Aristotle wrote about the proper way to educate boy companions, emphasizing that physical intimacy should be balanced with intellectual development. The great philosophers of Greece spent considerable effort creating elaborate theories to justify what was essentially systematic child abuse. The Gymnasium culture of ancient Greece centered around the display and selection of boy companions. These weren't just athletic facilities, but social spaces where men came to observe and evaluate potential eromenos. Boys exercised nude, allowing older men to assess their physical development and natural beauty. Wrestling matches and running competitions became opportunities for Erastes to identify boys they wanted to pursue. The pretense was that these relationships were educational. Older men would claim to be mentoring younger ones, providing guidance in philosophy, politics, and culture. But the reality was that most Erastes had minimal interest in their eromenos' intellectual development. The education provided was primarily about submission, obedience, and techniques for providing physical pleasure. The power dynamics were absolute and unquestionable. An eromenos who resisted his Erastes' demands faced severe punishment. Running away was nearly impossible since escaped boy slaves were actively hunted by both authorities and bounty hunters. The few who managed to flee found themselves without resources, citizenship, or legal protection in a world where their status as property was recognized by every city-state. But here's where the Greek system becomes even more twisted. The society that created democracy and celebrated individual freedom had developed elaborate legal frameworks to protect the rights of Erastes, while offering no protection whatsoever to their boy companions. Laws specified the proper treatment of eromenos in terms of their value as property, not their welfare as human beings. If an Erastes damaged his boy companion through excessive violence or neglect, he could be sued by the boy's legal owner for destruction of property. But the boy himself had no legal standing to complain about abuse, no right to protection, and no avenue for seeking justice. The same legal system that guaranteed rights to adult male citizens treated children as livestock with detailed regulations about their care and use. The military applications of the eromenos system created some of the most horrific scenarios in this already dark institution. The Sacred Band of Thebes, celebrated by historians as an elite military unit, was composed entirely of male couples where older warriors fought alongside their boy companions. The theory was that men would fight more fiercely to protect their beloved ones. In practice, this meant that boys as young as 14 were taken into combat zones, where they served both as human shields for their Erastes. When the sacred band was finally destroyed by Philip of Macedon, the battlefield was littered with the bodies of boy companions who had died protecting men who owned them. Spartan military culture took the exploitation even further. Young boys were removed from their families at age 7 and placed in military training programs, where they were assigned to older warriors as eromenos. The famous Spartan military efficiency was built on a foundation of institutionalized child abuse that continued for over a decade of each boy's life. The religious dimensions of Greek boy companion culture reveal how deeply embedded these practices were in every aspect of society. Temples dedicated to gods like Apollo and Dionysus featured boy priests who served both religious and intimate functions. Religious festivals included competitions where boys displayed themselves for the selection of new Erastes. The oracle at Delphi, one of the most sacred sites in the Greek world, maintained a staff of boy attendants who provided intimate services to visiting dignitaries and wealthy pilgrims. These boys were considered sacred property of the god Apollo, which gave their exploitation a religious sanction that made it unquestionable. Temple records from various sites show the systematic organization of boy companion procurement and training. Boys were purchased or donated to temples where they received education in music, dance, and the intimate arts required for their religious duties. The most beautiful and talented became temple favorites, while others were assigned to serve visiting worshippers. The economic impact of the Eromenos system on Greek society was enormous. Wealthy families spent fortunes acquiring and maintaining beautiful boy companions. The competition for the most desirable boys drove prices to levels that rivaled the cost of ships or estates. Some men bankrupted themselves pursuing boys who caught their attention at gymnasiums or festivals. The luxury goods industry that developed around boy companions created entire economic sectors. Specialized clothing, jewelry, cosmetics, and grooming implements designed specifically for Eromenos became major trade categories. Perfume makers, hairdressers, and body trainers built careers serving the men who owned boy companions. But the human cost was incalculable. Boys who survived their years as Eromenos faced a future with limited options. Most had received no practical education or job training. Many were psychologically damaged by years of abuse. Some turned to prostitution as their only means of survival. Others died by suicide rather than face the prospect of aging out of their usefulness. The transition from Eromenos to adult status was particularly brutal. Greek society celebrated youthful male beauty but had no place for boy companions who had grown too old to be desirable. Most Orestes simply discarded their aging Eromenos, replacing them with younger boys. The discarded companions faced homelessness, poverty, and social rejection. Some former Eromenos became Orestes themselves, perpetuating the cycle of abuse by acquiring their own boy companions. This created a self-sustaining system where victims became perpetrators, ensuring that the institution continued across generations. The psychological damage was passed down like an inheritance of trauma. The medical practices surrounding boy companions reveal the clinical precision with which Greek society managed human property. Doctors specialized in maintaining the health and appearance of Eromenos, treating them like valuable livestock that required expert care. Medical texts included detailed instructions for preserving youthful appearance, treating injuries from intimate abuse, and preventing diseases that could reduce a boy's value. The most disturbing medical interventions involved procedures designed to maintain the illusion of youth. Boys approaching adulthood underwent treatments to delay physical maturation, keep their voices high, and prevent the development of adult masculine characteristics. Some of these treatments were toxic, causing permanent damage or death. But let's be clear about what we're really discussing here. This wasn't an ancient version of mentorship or a cultural practice that simply seems strange to modern eyes. This was systematic child sexual abuse, organized and protected by law, celebrated in art and literature, and justified by the greatest philosophers of the ancient world. The boys who suffered in this system were real children with real feelings, real pain, and real trauma. They had names, families, dreams that were crushed by men who saw them as objects for pleasure. Alexios, standing on that marble platform in the agora, wasn't just a historical abstraction. He was a child whose life was about to be destroyed by a system that valued his body over his humanity. The normalization of this abuse in Greek society shows how cultural institutions can corrupt even the most basic human moral instincts. When child exploitation becomes embedded in law, religion, philosophy, and daily social practice, entire civilizations can participate in horrors while convincing themselves they're engaged in something noble and beautiful. The legacy of the Iromano system extended far beyond ancient Greece. Roman society adopted and expanded these practices. The influence spread through the Mediterranean world and persisted in various forms for centuries. The philosophical justifications created by Greek thinkers were used to excuse similar exploitation in other cultures and time periods. Even today, we see echoes of these attitudes in how societies handle child abuse. The tendency to romanticize or minimize harm, to focus on the supposed benefits to victims, to create elaborate justifications for exploitation. The Greek model provided a template that has been adapted and reused throughout history. But here's what makes this history particularly important to understand. The ancient Greeks weren't monsters or aliens with completely different moral frameworks. They were human beings like us, capable of both tremendous achievements and terrible cruelties. The same culture that produced democracy, philosophy, and art also systematically abused children for centuries. This reminds us that cultural progress isn't inevitable or permanent. Societies can normalize horrible practices while maintaining sophisticated, legal, philosophical, and artistic traditions. The Greeks created beautiful temples while filling them with abused children. They wrote moving poetry while ignoring the suffering of the boys who inspired it. The men who participated in the Iromano system weren't uniquely evil. They were ordinary people who accepted the cultural norms of their time without questioning the human cost. This should make us examine our own cultural blind spots and ask what practices we might be normalizing that future generations will find abhorrent. The survival strategies developed by boys trapped in the Iromano system reveal both human resilience and the psychological damage caused by prolonged abuse. Some boys learned to dissociate during intimate encounters, mentally escaping their physical circumstances. Others developed elaborate fantasies about rescue or revenge that helped them endure daily humiliation. Many formed secret friendships with other boy companions, creating support networks that operated beneath the notice of their owners. These relationships provided emotional sustenance and practical advice about survival techniques. Boys shared information about which pederasties were more dangerous, how to minimize physical harm, and strategies for psychological preservation. But the isolation and shame imposed by the system made healing nearly impossible. Boys were taught that their abuse was normal, even beneficial. They were told that they were privileged to serve distinguished men, that their suffering was character building, that resistance was ungrateful and selfish. This psychological manipulation often prevented victims from recognizing the injustice of their treatment. The artistic representations of eromenos relationships in Greek pottery, sculpture, and literature created a romanticized version of reality that obscured the brutal truth. Faces depicting loving scenes between men and boys were created by artists who ignored the coercion and abuse that characterized these relationships in real life. The poetry celebrating beautiful boys focused on their physical attributes while ignoring their inner lives, their pain, their desire for freedom. The philosophical dialogues about ideal love treated boy companions as abstractions, rather than human beings with agency and feelings. This artistic legacy helped normalize and perpetuate the system by making it seem beautiful and noble rather than exploitative and cruel. The religious ceremonies that incorporated boy companions created some of the most psychologically damaging aspects of the system. Boys were taught that serving older men was a sacred duty, that their bodies were instruments of divine worship, that resistance to abuse was rebellion against the gods themselves. These religious justifications made escape not just practically difficult, but spiritually impossible for many victims. Boys who had been raised to believe that their exploitation was holy couldn't imagine alternatives without facing what they perceived as divine punishment. The fusion of religious authority with sexual abuse created trauma that lasted long after the physical abuse ended. The international dimensions of the boy companion trade connected Greek exploitation to similar systems throughout the ancient world. Greek merchants traveled to distant lands specifically to acquire exotic boys for wealthy pederasties. These trading networks spread Greek practices to other cultures while bringing foreign boys into Greek households. The preferences of Greek pederasties shaped international markets in human beings. Fair-skinned boys from the north commanded premium prices. Dark-skinned boys from Africa were valued for their rarity. Boys from Persia were prized for their supposed sophistication and refinement. Each preference created demand that drove traders to venture farther and take greater risks to supply Greek appetites. But the most tragic aspect of the Eromenos system was how it corrupted the very concept of education and mentorship. Greek society claimed that these relationships provided valuable learning experiences for boys, that older men were sharing wisdom and culture with their young companions. In reality, the education provided to most Eromenos was limited to skills that increased their value as sexual partners. They learned to play musical instruments, compose poetry, and engage in philosophical discussions, primarily to entertain their pederasties. Any genuine learning that occurred happened despite the system, not because of it. The few boys who did receive substantial education were usually those whose pederasties had specific interests in scholarship or politics. But even these fortunate few faced the constant pressure of knowing that their intellectual development was secondary to their physical availability. Their education was always contingent on continued sexual service. As we reach the end of this journey into one of history's darkest chapters, we must confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of civilization and human progress. The ancient Greeks created institutions and ideas that still influence our world today. Democracy, philosophy, theater, architecture. These gifts to humanity emerged from a society that systematically abused children. This doesn't mean we should reject Greek achievements or ignore their contributions to human culture. But it does mean we should remember that progress is never pure, that every society contains both light and shadow, that the capacity for both great achievement and terrible cruelty exists in every human culture. The boys who suffered in the Iromano system deserve to be remembered not as footnotes to Greek glory, but as human beings whose pain mattered, whose lives had value beyond their utility to powerful men. They were children who deserved protection, education, and love instead of exploitation, abuse, and objectification. Their stories remind us that the price of cultural achievement can include human suffering that's hidden from official histories. The temples, theaters, and gymnasiums of ancient Greece were built not just with stone and marble, but with the broken lives of children whose names we'll never know. Today, as we face our own challenges with protecting children from exploitation, the Greek example serves as both warning and inspiration. It shows us how entire societies can normalize horrible practices when they serve the interests of powerful groups. But it also shows us that human resilience can survive even the most systematic abuse. The institutions that protected and perpetuated the Iromano system eventually crumbled. The Roman Empire that inherited these practices eventually faced its own collapse. The justifications created by philosophers and poets were ultimately recognized as elaborate excuses for inexcusable behavior. Truth has a way of surviving even the most sophisticated attempts to obscure it. We honor the memory of boys like Alexios not by romanticizing their suffering or finding hidden benefits in their abuse, but by acknowledging the full horror of what they endured. They were children who deserved better from the adults who controlled their lives. They were human beings whose pain mattered just as much as the achievements of the men who exploited them. The ancient Greek Iromano system stands as one of history's clearest examples of how cultural institutions can corrupt moral judgment and normalize the unthinkable. It reminds us that the price of civilization can include forms of suffering that challenge our most basic assumptions about human progress and moral development. But it also reminds us that every generation has the opportunity to examine its own practices, to question cultural norms that cause harm, and to choose protection over exploitation, justice over convenience, human dignity over cultural tradition. The boys who suffered in ancient Greece can't be saved, but understanding their stories can help us protect the children who depend on us today. If this exploration into the shadows of human history has opened your eyes to hidden truths about the past, subscribe to continue this journey together. There are countless more stories buried in history's archives, waiting for someone willing to listen to voices that powerful institutions tried to silence. Click that subscribe button to ensure these forgotten testimonies reach others who seek to understand the full spectrum of human experience, both its darkest failures and its potential for redemption.